Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. What's the most dangerous kind of censorship? Now, let's just walk through broadly three different kinds of censorship. There might be a nicer categorization and characterization of different sort of categories of censorship, but just these three suffice for the moment. The first is that done by the state, and in our lawsuit, Changizi versus the federal government, on a First Amendment case with Michael Sanger and Daniel Kotzen and our New Civil Liberties Alliance, we're pushing back on First Amendment grounds, and certainly if we win, that's great. But really, even before the federal government got their hand deeply in it in sort of early 2021, censorship was rife. There was censorship all over the place, and so I'm not sure that even if we win this case, it's more than symbolic. It's a little bit more than symbolic if we can win this, but a lot of where the problem is goes well beyond state censorship, because there's another area that I think one could potentially legally address, and we've talked about this too, and that's with companies and public accommodations and things like Twitter, in preventing public accommodations from engaging in censorship. They shouldn't be able to discriminate on the basis of age, sex, race, LGBTQ, and so forth, or political opposition. Public accommodations should just be open to anybody who wants to walk in. I shouldn't have to check to say, are they taking libertarians, or are they taking Jordanians who work in the mines this week, or whatever weird kind of category you might be in, including political categories. This should just be irrelevant. But even that, all of these would be substantive steps, and I think they both should be pursued. But even that isn't the scariest, and that's what we focus at our Free Expression Institute. It goes way beyond that. Even before potentially this, the big tech media and CNN and BBC all began to work together to say, okay, we need to start to censor misinformation on COVID, and they sort of created a sort of monopolistic censorship together. And this was before the federal government came down and said, you guys even need to do more. I mean, so they were involved in it as well. But even without all of that, a lot of the censorship that goes on, a lot of the most dangerous censorship is organic. It's done through bottom-up forces of people who are either themselves in a collective hysteria and got this idea that there's a thing that's attacking us as a civilization, and nobody should be allowed to say anything negative against it. You're a denier. If you do, you should be canceled, and there should be petitions written about you, and you should be brought up to The Hague for potentially encouraging herd immunity. This is if you're a defender of the Great Barrington Declaration, which was just say you need to focus protection on those who are most vulnerable, and they're 1,000, 10,000 times more at risk than those who are young and healthy. Why shouldn't you focus protection on them rather than doing these massive ranges of draconian and useless interventions? But if you propose this sort of thing, you are the worst kind of person. These are the kinds of bottom-up forces that just happen from friends and family and colleagues at work and other journalists and other academics. These are the things that, in fact, when censorship works, even when censorship works from the government top down, it's really only effective when you've got private companies or the populace who are already on board. They're the ones who can act as snitches on the street, or snitches on every Twitter corner and every Facebook corner, and report. It requires those masses to already be caught up in it and have a lack of any kind of tolerance and a lack of appreciation for free expression that allows those top ones to potentially ratchet down and do even one better. But even without those top-down forces, or sort of big tech down forces, the most dangerous ones are the populace itself. And this is why what we focus on in the Free Expression Group is really about understanding these or holistic forces that occur mostly amongst the masses, and how these waves of thought can go through and create groupthink, and how you can potentially deter that. So I think that a lot of us, and it could look as if we are focusing a lot on the First Amendment, and we are, because it's an important part of the fight, and it's an important part of the fight to fight Twitter and Facebook and to get these things right. But the biggest part of the fight for free expression and for freedom generally is in all of the folks around you and the people in your community, your friends and family, to encourage both you being tolerant of their positions and encouraging them and teaching them to be tolerant of your own. So let me ask you, as one kind of argument as to how effective this kind of bottom-up level censorship, I would say, where were the academics as of March 2020? Where were they all? I mean, epidemiology and all the economists all know that lockdowns are utterly devastating. And it would have taken just a few seconds search to realize that no, lockdowns are not something that we do. China was supposedly doing this, and but otherwise it's not a thing that we do. In fact, all the recommendations suggest you should really never ever do this. It's really all bad, and it's obviously bad. Where were all the economists? There was several. I tweeted them. I talked about those folks, but most of them kept their mouths shut, and they kept their mouths shut. Why? Is it because they were afraid of getting kicked off of Twitter? Was it because of big tech down censorship, so to speak? No, they weren't really afraid of that. Was it because the federal government had already set up rules saying that, oh, you're going to get fined if you start talking about the uselessness of the interventions and all of the disproportionate harms? Were they worried about the federal government doing something to them? Almost in no case that was that true. They did it because either they themselves were caught up in the moral panic and really came to believe through the kinds of processes I've talked about before that they're in this echo chamber and they've come to believe it because all their high reputation believe. But I'm really talking about that doesn't really count as censorship. That's a problem with the way free expression works in ill or sick networks, which is what we're studying. But there's a whole bunch of other folks, surely, that weren't themselves per se caught up in it, but they kept their mouths shut. And they kept their mouths shut not because of big tech and not because of the federal government. They kept their mouths shut because they know that if they begin to speak up, that kind of moral outrage will be directed towards them. And in fact, it was eventually directed towards people like me, the epidemiologists who kept, had cancel petitions after them in university, anybody who did be. And most people then just kept their mouths shut. Most people didn't even let their minds stray, even if they were fairly apolitical and didn't get it. They know, and their bones know, even before, they don't have to think the thought. They don't have to say, oh, if I start writing about this or start speaking out, I'm good. Many of them don't even let their brains go that far, much less start entertaining anti-mainstream thoughts, because if you start going down that road and you start making any peep, well, word's going to get out. And when you apply for your next grant, it goes to 7 referees, reviewers, and a whole bunch of committees that are looking at it, and they know somebody who knows that you were a denier. Your ability to get grants will suddenly go down inexplicably. And there's never going to be any way to show that that's the reason. And next time you're trying to get a promotion at university, this is going to plague you. The next time you want any kind of raise, the next time you want to be invited to a conference, all of these, the entire ability for you to move forward as a scientist, as an academic, will be crushed. And you know that without even having to think through all of these thoughts that I just walked through, which is why they're quiet. It's fear of your colleagues, it's fear of your friends, it's fear of your peers, most of all. Not fear of these big, gigantic companies in the federal government, that ultimately what makes censorship works when it works really well. The most dystopian and dangerous kinds of societies to live in that really crush your soul are the ones where it's intolerance amongst the masses, not censorial top-down censorship. If you've got top-down censorship and they're trying to, but none of your friends care, everybody sticks their middle finger up at these forces and ignores them. That's not scary. What's scary is when the people at the bottom, when you've got censorship at that level. And that's our main thrust at freex.group, is to research and study how these kinds of sensorial attitudes, sensorial waves, how these groupthinks work. And that's really not a government thing and not a big tech thing. It's a human social network thing. And that was your science moment.